Mercury today is in the hands of traffickers. Mercury is like cocaine, it's smuggled. This mercury gets into the water, the fish absorb this mercury, people catch the fish, and in this way, the mercury enters the bloodstream of those who eat fish. More than thousands of people, not just those from the village, but people who consumed this fish, started to have terrible neurological problems, movement issues and brain deficiencies, and especially the children who were already born with disabilities. Filipero is one, he's a survivor, he doesn't have any other opportunity, he's there and that's all he knows how to do. Deep down he's a slave. From the mine owners, the guy is there in the mine, he's forced to buy from the mine owner, he gets into debt and that's how he gets trapped. There he gets a few grams of gold, then he goes to the brothel in the neighboring town, feels like a king, spends everything and comes back in misery. This is a cycle that keeps repeating itself in these stories.
Who is the big force behind this? Who are the powerful ones here? Faria Lima, the banks.
Where does the gold go? I'm not interested in aesthetics. I'm interested in the person. A camera doesn't make a film. Having one in your pocket doesn't mean a film will happen. The film is created in your mind.
You're not afraid of dying.
If I were afraid of dying, I wouldn't be doing what I do.
Have you been threatened?
It happened many times already in that region. If you're afraid, then you won't. Be threatened.
The episode is already starting, it's amazing. But before that, I have an important message for you. We noticed that 81% of the people who watch M3 are not subscribed to the channel. It's a simple gesture for you, it doesn't cost anything, you just have to press a button now, but for me it's very important, it makes all the difference. So, here's my request. Subscribe to the channel and share this episode with someone you think will enjoy it. Hold on, the episode is already starting, but I have just one more little message for you. If you want to study with me, take all my courses, and even have live mentoring with me every month on Zoom, come join the Jornada Club. All the details are here in the video description. Check it out, and now let's go to the first act. My guest arrived in the Amazon when the forest still didn't make headlines or get likes. While many people talked about progress, he listened to the noise of the machines, the silence of the rivers, and the crackling of the fires. He made the camera his road notebook, a method of improvisation, a discipline. He is the son of Austrians who fled Nazism, anarchists by conviction. My guest is a navigator and aviator. And in his films he faced powerful overseers and gold miners. He told stories of those who didn't always fit in the frame and protected his characters, when filming in the forest was even more dangerous. Now, at 82 years old, be amazed, he continues on the same mission. Jorge Bodanzky, you may come in. Very welcome. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure.
I want you.
Me in your debut, João Roni invited me, but I couldn't come because of the recordings here. It was good. It was great. I saw that it was packed, right?
It was packed, yeah, but there was a long chat afterwards with Dros Varela, right? And really lively.
You could ask to get closer. You can get much closer if you can, okay? This microphone works best when used up close.
All right, that's fine.
I heard about it. Luis Ferrer, who's a mutual friend, said there were several interesting reactions from the audience in that conversation, right? He said there was a lady who was from an Asian car manufacturer.
It's from Korea, right?
What was it? What happened?
I don't know if it was Hyundai or not. No, because one of the questions is this. We should boycott the companies that operate in mining, right? Exactly.
It was a question from the audience,
Yeah. And one of the companies is a manufacturer of dredges, of excavators, right? And it's a South Korean company.
Samsung, I imagine.
Not sure if it's Hyundai or Samsung.
Both of them have this kind of thing.
And saying that we should boycott this company, not buy products from this company, cars from this company, because this company sells the excavators, right? So what now? She stood up and said the following: no, I'm from one of these companies, right? And we are aware of what we're doing. And in fact, the company is going to limit it. It won't sell this equipment in those areas anymore. Also, if they don't sell it there, he'll just buy it elsewhere, right? But it's interesting.
Do you think this is the movie's first impact?
No, I believe the movie's impact is greater in the health field. And there are several impacts, several levels of discussion. It's interesting because I've already shown this movie in different places, at different times, to different audiences. And each one pulls in a different direction, and it's usually a surprise. What are these directions? It's always a different aspect of the movie that comes up.
Just so there's no unanswered question, do you agree with what the person in the audience said? That the manufacturer should stop selling the equipment to Brazil or to those areas? Yes.
Stopping sales is unrealistic, right? Because if there's demand, someone will sell, right? But I think the fact that she's aware of this, that the equipment from the company she works for contributes to this situation, is already very important. How do you solve this? It doesn't depend on Hyundai whether they sell or not. It's a much more complex problem.
You said Dr. Drauzio Varela was with you on stage, right?
He was invited so we could have a conversation together.
By Drauzio?
Because Drauzio, besides being a great expert on the Amazon, even said himself that he has been to the Amazon more than 150 times. He is a doctor, he works in healthcare, and the theme of the film is the issue of health. The film addresses, let's say, the harm caused by mercury in the river waters where the miners work. This mercury gets into the water, the fish absorb this mercury, people catch the fish, and in this way the mercury enters the bloodstream of those who eat the fish.
Do you think Brazilians care about this?
Look, it depends on who, right? I think they do want to know, yes. In fact, the film was only possible to make because the local communities, those who live with the consequences of this, were the ones who called Fiocruz, right? They called the doctor, Dr. Eric Jennings, who is the character in my film, to go there and do a survey of the contamination level at his request. So it depends on which Brazilians, right? I think the Brazilians here in Sao Paulo or Rio aren't really that interested in this. It also depends on who you're talking about, you know? Of course, it's a very partisan thing, right?
Does your movie naturally address ideological and political issues?
Oh, totally. It's a movie.
I watched it.
Yeah, it's a political movie.
That's the intention.
The intention is broader, right? I don't do politics with cinema, but obviously my movies end up falling into the political sphere, right? Because all the issues go through politics, right? So much so that in the film, in one of the final statements, Dr. Eric says the following: it's essentially a political problem, right? Everything the film shows is just the tip of the iceberg of Amazonian issues, and they all go through politics, right?
Dr. Eric is the figure you portray in the movie, right?
The character who was actually responsible for coming up with the idea for the movie, he was the one who, let's say, sparked in me the desire to make this film.
That was my question. What does a demand for wheelchairs for children have to do with you making this film?
It has everything to do with it, because I was filming the Trans-Amazon, a series for home box office at the time called Trans-Amazon, A Road to the Past, and we were on the Trans-Amazon. It runs alongside the Tapajos River and crosses, cuts through the middle of the Munduruku territory. And when we passed by, there was a meeting of Munduruku chiefs who were discussing the issue of a hydroelectric plant that was being planned. Anyway, I found it interesting. We stopped there to film this gathering of the chiefs, and there was a doctor with us. I didn't know this doctor. I started talking to him. and I was curious about what a doctor was doing there. And he who told me said, look, I came here because there was an unusual demand for wheelchairs for children. And he already suspected that it could be a consequence of Mercury, but he wanted to have proof of it, so he went there to research it. And then, in an open conversation, he said, look, the symptoms we're seeing here are the same as those that happened in Minamata Bay in Japan, where an industry, in the 1950s, a chemical industry spilled mercury into the water of that bay. At the time, it wasn't known that mercury caused all these problems, and then the fish absorbed the mercury. It was a fishing village. People started to have...
This in the 1930s, right? 1930.
It's because the neurological symptoms that appear when a person has mercury in their blood take a long time to show up. 10, 20, 30 years. And then horrible things started happening to the inhabitants of Minamata Bay. And they started doing tests, even with animals, with cats, to see if it was really the case.
The images of the cats in your film, it's terrifying.
To see if it was really mercury that was causing this. And they came to the conclusion that it was mercury, right? But the thing is, everyone already had extremely high levels of mercury, so that's the situation. More than thousands of people, not just those from the village, but also people who ate this fish, started having terrible neurological problems, movement issues, and brain deficiencies. And especially the children who were already born with disabilities. And what about the Japanese? For 30 years, they fought to shut down that plastic factory, right?
Right.
Chemical products, plastic, not just plastic, right? And first to ban the dumping of mercury, second to shut down the factory, third to be compensated, right? And this was such an important movement in Japan that these symptoms came to be called Minamata disease because of this Minamata accident, and it was the first accident whose cause was ecological, right? That we know of like this, right? It was a big struggle for the Japanese people. And all of this also came to light because of an American photographer, a very famous photographer. He wasn't that famous at the time, named Eugen Smith, who was married to a Japanese woman. And I think this Japanese woman was from the Minamata region. So he went there. He did a series of reports, including one that became very famous in Life magazine back in the 1950s, with a photo that is still emblematic today, which we call the Pietà. It's a mother holding a disabled child with her face all twisted, you know. And unfortunately, we didn't include this photo in the film because we couldn't get authorization for it, but it doesn't matter. And these photographs had a big impact, right? And then people wanted to know what was happening in Minamata, right? So Minamata, even today, is the great symbol, let's say, of the harm caused by mercury.
When I saw those images of Minamata without any reflection, Hiroshima came to my mind, because they're Japanese after all. They're old images of people suffering from something caused by a chemical. Do you make any connection?
I think so. The similarity between the images is really strong, right? You don't have physical destruction, but you have the destruction of people, right? It's really a very sad story, right? Because the damage caused by mercury is irreversible, right? Once someone is poisoned by mercury, it's for life, right? There's no going back, right? And those people are still there, right? Even today, right? Is there a Minamata museum? We showed these people in the film, we talked to them, and they were very surprised because they had no idea that this was also happening in the Amazon. And they showed a lot of solidarity with the riverside populations of the Amazon. And we recorded a short teaser with them showing solidarity with the people of the Amazon. And this teaser, we narrated it in Munduruku and we showed it to the Munduruku communities before making the film. So they could understand what the goal of our film was. Why the comparison with Minamata, right? So they watched this film, understood what Minamata is, and felt the solidarity of the Japanese people regarding what was happening in the Amazon. In fact, we show this at the end of the film, projecting this.
For me, this is the film's most moving part.
It's where they see what everyone felt, which is their future if nothing is done.
What does a chemical and plastics factory in Japan have to do with mining in Brazil? Why are the consequences similar? Can you explain to me a little how that mercury starts spreading there?
Well, the similarity is mercury poisoning. Oh no, there it was a fishing village. In Brazil, mercury has always been used to separate gold from rocks. It makes the gold heavier, so when that sieve is used, the gold settles. Once it's covered in mercury, that mercury then has to be separated. It has to be removed from the gold. This is done with a blowtorch, and that mercury evaporates. Part of it evaporates, and another part goes into the water that's used to wash, to separate the mercury from the gold. And that water they use for washing, it goes back to the river, and then that mercury that settles at the bottom of the river is organic mercury. Organic mercury is common in nature, and by itself it doesn't cause much harm. But once it's down there, the bacteria at the bottom of the river turn it into methyl mercury. And this methyl mercury is what's poisonous. And that's what is absorbed by the small fish at the bottom of the river. The bigger fish eat the smaller ones, and so on until it reaches humans.
It is found in the hair of the indigenous population.
It is found throughout the whole body, but hair is used, which is the easiest way to identify how much mercury a person has.
Jorge, if this issue is so serious and so important, why are you the only one denouncing it?
Look, I made the film, but this issue has existed for a long time. It's not new. The thing is, since the consequences of this take 10, 20 years to happen, then what are we seeing today? It's a consequence of gold mining from 10, 20 years ago, and back then it was on a smaller scale. As they started to get more investment and use heavier machinery, the amount of land being washed is very large, and the amount of mercury going into the rivers is also very large. So, a problem that used to be a minor issue because the miners didn't feel it. They die young from other causes and maybe because of this as well. But they didn't realize it was the mercury. They always said, no, I'm here. I know mercury is dangerous, but I'm fine. I'm healthy. I've been mining for 10 years because the guy was completely poisoned already, right?
It's not only the indigenous people, miners are suffering too.
It doesn't start with the miners. The miners are the first to suffer. That's because besides the water, they absorb the mercury vapor when they separate the mercury. So this mercury vapor, they breathe it in directly, and then they'll die of cancer. They think it wasn't the mercury that caused this. It's not that they're against it, it's just that they didn't have this knowledge, this information. Very few people actually had access to this information.
But now that they have it, why does it continue?
That's the point. It's a political problem. Why do they keep looking for gold? Because there's a demand for gold, and nowadays mercury is in the hands of the mafia traffickers. Mercury is like cocaine, it's smuggled.
Selling mercury is illegal in Brazil.
Mercury is not officially legal, it's banned by the Minamata Convention. This Minamata problem was so serious that the United Nations ended up creating a convention called the Minamata Convention, where the signatory countries of this commission, more than 100 countries including Brazil, committed to no longer trading mercury starting in 2030. But, as the movie itself says, the federal police officer who gives us a statement in the film says, if we can't stop drug smuggling, mercury is the same thing. Mercury is treated like a drug by traffickers, and it's an extremely profitable drug, much more profitable than consumer drugs. So, it's an extremely complex problem because the demand for gold has increased a lot. Gold is a commodity. And with the financial crisis since 2008 and now with this instability,
It's even more valuable.
it's much more valuable. It's a banking reserve, so there's a demand and the price of gold is way up, so it's extremely profitable. And the Brazilian government has no presence in these areas, which are huge regions, most of the time preservation areas, inside indigenous territories. We felt that when Lula's government started, the Yanomami asked the army to go there to stop the mining, which had practically taken over the Yanomami area. The difficulty was with the logistics to establish a presence there. And it's so complicated because you go to a place, you either arrest people or expel them, or you burn the rafts. 3 months later, they're in Rio. On the other hand, you can't control that because people, you also can't blame the ones at the end. What we call a miner, the miner is a survivor. He's a survivor. He doesn't have any other opportunity. He's there and that's all he knows how to do. Deep down, he's a slave. He's a slave to the mine owners because it's that old thing that goes back to the rubber era. The guy is there in the mine. He's forced to buy from the mine owner. He gets into debt and that's how he gets stuck there.
It's like that song by Luis Gonzaga, and that's how it goes. Owing, owing, it's non-stop debt.
And it's very illusory because there's a lot of money circulating inside the mine. A cook at the mine makes more than $12,000 a month and the miner gets a few grams of gold. Then he goes to the brothel in the neighboring town, feels like a king, spends everything, and comes back broke. This is a cycle that keeps repeating in this story.
You're advertising because 12,000 raise is a great salary?
But she loses everything there because transportation is expensive, life is expensive. So when she saves a little to go back home later, there are so many expenses that she arrives with almost nothing. Then she must return to the mine to earn more money.
And she runs the risk of being extorted.
There's all of that. It's a lawless land, so I imagine anything can happen there.
And then I mention the end of your film, which uses Caetano's song, and I ask, will the empire of law ever reach the heart of Pará someday?
Yeah, Caetano did that back in the 80s. That song, I don't know exactly when, but it seems like it was made for the film.
I believe it was more recent, likely from the album C in the 2000s, though it feels like it was made for the film.
Right, exactly. When we heard about this song, we said, wow, we have to put this song in the film no matter what. And Caetano was very kind, he allowed it. But it's not just about his part, right? He even talks about gold, doesn't he? There's a record label, but we managed to get the song in the film. We couldn't end the film without this song.
But then I ask after the film, do you believe the rule of law will reach Pará?
Look, there are two things that happen, right?
And I say Pará in a general sense, to talk about the whole Amazon region.
People always ask me, you've been in the Amazon for 50 years, what has changed? If anything has changed, I say, look, there's one thing that hasn't changed, it only got worse. Everything we see. In my first films, especially in Aracema, for example, everything the film shows. Slave labor, child prostitution, illegal land occupation, fires, loggers, smuggling, all of that is still happening, maybe even more intensely. But there is one thing that has changed, that is changing, which is the organization of civil society. Today, anywhere you go in the Amazon, you get there and the community is organized, they have representation, they know what they want. The problem is that they are not heard, but they are organized, although there still isn't a lot of integration. But this is happening very quickly because they all have cell phones, use social networks, and are organizing themselves. We're going to see this now at the Conference of the Parties.
You will.
I'm not going exactly during the week of the Conference of the Parties, but I'll go a little earlier actually to show the movie. The movie will be screened there. Several organizations requested the movie, and of course we agreed. But I myself will screen the movie as part of a Fiocruz program now at the end of October.
There's a scene in the movie that's also very striking. And it's interesting because one of the most striking moments in a photographer's movie is when there's no image. When the camera is turned off and we see that there's some confusion, and it seems to me that there's a death threat there. There are indigenous people supporting miners and attacking photographers and filmmakers who want to expose what's harming them.
It's even more serious because a large part, not just of the indigenous population, but also the riverside communities and even quilombolas, are being co-opted by the miners. The person is there, isolated, struggling, and then someone shows up offering easy money, gives them a cell phone, gives them a Hilux, and especially the young people naturally get drawn to this and end up protecting the miners.
Even that pickup truck.
Or sometimes a food basket, or even gasoline for the outboard motors. All these conveniences, because for the miner it's very easy, but for the indigenous people and river dwellers it's a very expensive, very difficult product. So they are co-opted and end up even defending the miners, even when they aren't miners themselves. And they become almost slaves to the mining, depending on these miners. So today, the communities, speaking more about the community I portrayed, the Munduruku indigenous people, I would say that a third, maybe even more, are miners, or in favor of mining, or protect the miners. So it's a very big internal division, very difficult, which is also a huge problem. So the indigenous leaders who are against mining have a hard time acting. First, because they have nothing to offer, no money, nothing. The only thing they can offer is information. They say, look, you're going to get sick, you're going to die, this will happen, that will happen. But it's such a hard disease to explain because it's not visible. It takes a long time to happen. How are you going to convince someone that they're going to get sick in 10 or 20 years? They don't care. I want to eat today. I want my cell phone right now. And going back to the movie scene, it's very impactful. For one reason, this happened because tests were done. The indigenous people, the indigenous leaders invited Fiocruz and Dr. Henning to do a survey of the mercury levels. This was done, but they mainly wanted the survey results. And then when Dr. Henning got ready to take these results back to the communities, the plane had to refuel in Jacareacanga, which is a city on the edge of the Trans-Amazonian Highway, and it's completely focused on gold mining. The mayor is indigenous, but he's a gold miner. And when the rumor spread that this was Dr. Henning's plane, they already knew this plane. They already knew he was going there to deliver the test results. They were violently attacked, at first with rocks and sticks and then with actual death threats. I wasn't there, it was during the pandemic, I wasn't there, but the cameraman Maka, who was the photographer for our film, and the producer Juliana, whom I called, were there. And it was the two of them on the plane and Dr.
All of them threatened?
All of them threatened. And here's what happened. They wanted to take the equipment, but he was very clever and threw the equipment inside the plane. But he had the presence of mind to leave the phone with the sound on. So he recorded the audio of the threats. We didn't have the footage, but we had the audio.
And it's very powerful. I would say that black screen is a very powerful image in the film.
And Doctor managed to take off, even while taking a risk.
He left at that moment?
He left, ready to run over anyone in his way because it was life or death. They were going to kill people.
The indigenous people who support mining?
Yes, the co-opted indigenous people. Their weapons appear threatening. There are some bulls and they talk.
Including that explosion that happens in the middle.
Those explosions are the bombs they throw, that the police throw, and they...
The police arrived at that moment.
I don't know if they arrived exactly at that moment, but right after, you have an image that's not ours. It's an image we got from Media Ninja, from Media India and Media Ninja. They recorded the clash between the federal police and the miners because they didn't just attack Doctor's plane, they started burning the helicopters. Anyway, everything that was there that they thought wasn't in favor of the mining didn't matter to them. They wanted to set things on fire, and the federal police were called and tried up to a certain point to stop them. It was a war. We can see the footage.
In your film, you portray indigenous people who are, let's say, activists, who are aware and trying to defend themselves, and there are those who are pro-mining. Who is the majority there? What is representative there?
That varies from place to place. But as I said, I would say that a good third, maybe even more, are already co-opted by mining. And this makes the issue very difficult because besides showing what's happening, it's almost impossible to convince those who have already been co-opted to go back. It's the same as telling a miner, look, you're doing harm here, go do something else with your life. That's not how it works.
If the miner is a survivor, the indigenous person and the riverside dweller are victims.
The miner is also a victim.
He is also a victim. Who is the great force behind this? Who are the powerful ones who are?
Here on Faria Lima.
On Faria Lima.
In the banks.
Because we just watched the movie.
Even asks where the gold goes. You just have to follow the path of the gold.
Explain it to me a little better. Because recently we saw the police showing that Faria Lima is connected to the Primero Comando da Capital to drug trafficking.
But these same trafficking organizations are the ones operating there. They're the same ones.
Aren't you afraid of dying?
If I feared death, I wouldn't do what I do.
Have you been threatened?
Yes, I have. Many times I've been threatened, but if you're there in that region, if you're afraid, then you won't go.
But what kind of threats did you face?
During the dictatorship, the threat was really being reported and arrested by the army. And once you were arrested by the army, anything could happen. And more recently, well, not that recently, there hasn't always been this animosity from people, let's say, interested in exploiting both the underground and the people who are there and not wanting to show what's going on. That's always been the case. In some places it's more violent, in others less so. But you're never really welcome when you show up there with a camera or as a journalist.
What consequence would you like your film to have?
It's happening, the fact that society is talking about it. The film. The purpose of a film is to show. The film doesn't bring solutions, and it's not the film that will make things change. But I think the film contributes in a very strong way to the understanding of what's happening there, both for people on the outside and for people on the inside. It's a film, as you said, an activist film that's being used by local leaders as an activist tool, a tool for persuasion and discussion.
Just elaborate a bit more so I can understand. When you say that the money, the masterminds are in Faria Lima...
I mean, not just in Faria Lima, that's what I want to understand. Symbolically, they're in Faria Lima. Explain that.
A little better because I'm in Faria World. Hey, Zanotto.
Because here's the thing, where does the good gold go?
In the end, it goes to Switzerland.
Yeah, it's just for the banks. It doesn't go to Switzerland, and there it's distributed to the banks. So that's it. And how does trafficking, how does it circulate? First, the Mercury has to circulate.
The Mercury has to enter Brazil.
The Mercury comes in and the gold goes out. This is in the hands of traffickers. The entire Amazon today is occupied by traffickers. The government's presence, which is only carried out by the army, there is no other Brazilian institution capable of having a presence in these places. There isn't. It would have to be a gigantic army to be able to occupy the Amazon, you understand?
Did I understand correctly? We're importing mercury, which is slowly killing us and destroying the Amazon, and we're exporting our gold, which is our wealth. Who is getting that money?
That question is almost obvious. Where does the gold go? Who buys this gold? All right. A part of it, maybe not a very large part, goes to jewelry. Also the jewelry market, which also uses illegal gold to make jewelry. But I think another part goes to industry as well. Cell phones also have small gold parts, but I think the gold that goes to industry is that part is more controlled. Because the big companies that work with these products, they go through, they need to legalize the gold they buy, but that gold is laundered. When it gets to the bank absolves itself of any blame. I bought it from this institution, I don't know what's here, the seal is this, it's that. We know it's all forged.
I've heard people walking around Goiânia, Brasilia. I've heard people say things like, oh, I'm buying a mine in such and such a place. I'm opening a mine in such and such a place. That's common.
Yes, that's common.
Brazilian politicians own mines.
Of course, because of the mining. It not only brings huge profits, but it also brings votes because it gives jobs to these people who later vote for the mine owners or whoever they recommend.
And how do you explain it after you made your film? To this ignorant person who can't understand the harm that mining does, why shouldn't it exist or why shouldn't it be this way?
It's a matter of knowledge. It's very hard to make them understand what's happening to them. Even when they do understand, they still say no. But that's something that's so far ahead, you know. I'm feeling good here, I'm working, I'm making money, I owe money, I don't know what, so I just stay here.
When I said ignorant, I meant those who support this politically, not the victims.
But that's intentional. The politicians, they know exactly what they're doing, saying that a politician is investing in mining out of innocence. I'm doing something good here. That's total naivety, total, right?
Do you remember this image here?
I remember.
When was it?
That's right. I must have been about 8 or 9 years old. This was on Alameda Franca, where I grew up, in the little garden in front of the house. I had an uncle who was an editor of a photography magazine called Iris, a very long-running magazine, and I don't know why, he gave me this camera, an American box camera called Ansco, which was made of wood.
It's similar to the one that was at the reception.
Yes, it has the same principle, right? No? It's not similar, but it's from the same earlier period. The box is a little earlier, but simple. It was very amateur. A camera where you don't have to adjust anything. It's almost like a box with a little hole, and that exposes the film.
It's the camera obscura.
It's kind of like a camera, right? Back then they were called box cameras, which were very popular because they were cheap and easy to use. You just had to press the button. You didn't need to do anything else, right? And it's funny that I was fascinated by this camera and I still have the photos. The first photos I took with that camera were of my dog, my cat, and my mother. Here is my dog named Branca. One of the first photographic records I made.
You got the focus right.
The camera would only do this. But it's funny, I've always preserved the things I've done, so unconsciously it's funny. Looking back today, I should have somehow foreseen it. Like, this is an important file, it's going to be important to me. So I kept everything. Here is my turtle, General Verva. And here, that's not Franca's name, right? The gate didn't have buildings. At the time...
His parents had a house in São Paulo.
They had one, they rented a house, a small house, a townhouse, you know, typical of that area, across from Augusta, there in my Franca, right? 2 blocks from Augusta.
Today there's a pizzeria there.
It's probably not the same building with the same number as before, but it's next to a small church that at the time was built by Dominican priests. And I used to tell everyone that you could see the church tower from Augusta Street, and I would say, look, I live right next to the church tower, right? Nowadays, you only notice a church when you're right in front of it.
How does the 82-year-old filmmaker who shoots with a cell phone explain this fact? For this boy...
It's very similar here, right? I think it's a way of looking at the world. I got curious to see the world through the lens, you know?
It doesn't matter which lens.
No, absolutely. It's a way for you to capture something. I want to show this. I want to see this. So, at the time, it was important to me. It was my dog, my turtle. There's also my mom, but it was my mom. At Lambda Franca, you see here, there's a building that used to be on Oscar Freire. There's nothing, no building here. There's no trace of the house. You could see all the way to Congonhas Airport. On the horizon, the planes from the air bridge. They used to fly right over the house back then, and most of them were Douglas commercial, 3S. And I didn't like studying, so I would just stay there to distract myself. I would write down the plane's registration and the time it passed by. Then every day I'd see, oh, it's late, it's having dinner.
Your mother is Austrian, right?
Austrian from Vienna.
From Vienna, your father too. How did they come there? To Brazil?
My father's brother had already arrived by the late 1920s. He lived in Rio de Janeiro and was well off. And when things got tough over there in Europe, my parents traveled in 1937. You could still leave, right? They came more or less thinking they would only stay here for a while, then be able to return to Europe when the war was over.
They came fleeing from Nazism.
They came fleeing from Nazism.
Jews.
Jews, yeah, they had to leave. There was no alternative at that moment. They were what was called at the time assimilated Jews. They weren't religious, right? Atheists, anarchists. But to the Nazis, they were considered Jews, right? So it doesn't matter if you go to the synagogue or not. If you're Jewish, you end up in the concentration camp just the same. But they had the means to leave, right? They made it to Brazil. My father, my father's sister, the whole family managed to come here, and part of the family settled in Rio de Janeiro because my uncle was already there, and my father came to São Paulo to be an engineer, and he was fascinated by São Paulo. At that time, they used to say that a new block was built every day in São Paulo. That's how fast it was growing. My father was fascinated by that.
They were anarchists. What does that mean?
The anarchist movement was a revolutionary movement that fought against all the regimes that were authoritarian at the time, especially the monarchy. So they didn't accept any kind of government. In fact, it was an anarchist from Kosovo who killed the Archduke of Austria, which was the spark that started World War I. And the anarchists were considered subversives, terrorists, and they were persecuted. My grandfather was an anarchist poet, and he wrote under a pseudonym so he could publish his poems. So that anarchist view remained for many, and in my family I found it interesting. My father wasn't an activist, but he said he sympathized with anarchism.
You're an anarchist.
I think I am.
What defines what makes you an anarchist?
Is not believing in a form of government. I think that any government at some point will restrict you, will limit you. And anarchism doesn't mean that everyone does whatever they want, but it's a way for society to organize itself without a central government.
Do you think that's the way?
I don't know. Nowadays it's hard to believe in anything.
Today there's a famous movie called Anarchists, thank God.
It's the title of the book by Mulher by Jorge Amado.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
Is it?
Because the anarchist is an atheist?
He's an atheist, of course. The atheist. A true anarchist has no religion.
And then you in a story.
A funny story about anarchism, because my father pointed that out to me. At the end of the 19th century, Dom Pedro invited a group of Italian anarchists to settle in Paraná. He gave them land and they established a colony called Colonia Sicilia, and this colony prospered for some time. And at a certain point, the guy who was responsible for the colony's economy, for the colony's finances, ran away and took the money, and it stopped being money. The colony collapsed because they went bankrupt. And there's a very interesting Italian movie called La Sicilia that tells this story. And it's also interesting how Dom Pedro sympathized with the anarchists. In fact, it was one of the few times when an anarchist was able to fully realize his vision, creating an isolated anarchist community there.
But how can a monarch be sympathetic to anarchists? Well,
He sympathized with some odd causes, right?
his mother also has a very curious story with Freud.
Is that it? My mother was a bookseller and was interning at a bookstore in Vienna, a small bookstore that was on the street where she lived. Freud on Bergasse. And Freud walked by every day. And the owner of the bookstore was also a publisher. He published Freud's works. So my mother saw Freud walk by in front and suggested it. He said, look, there was a small display window to put the books he published by Freud in the window, and Freud walked by, came into the bookstore to thank them for the tribute. Then he said, look, the idea came from this young lady here, and it was my mother.
She later had some ties to the family.
Yes. So Every time Freud or someone from Freud's house ordered a book, she would take the book to his house.
Did they become friends or just stay acquaintances?
She didn't say she had tea with the family, but she wasn't very young. She was in her early 20s, right?
I got curious. I mentioned the cell phone a little while ago, but I got curious. My profession, too, you started in journalism, right? Yes, you worked for magazines as a photographer. As a photographer, I understand that the camera and the quality of the camera were fundamental for you. You had your Super 8, then you started filming with 16mm.
It's all more or less simultaneous, right? When I started photographing, I used to photograph in 35mm. I had a Leica borrowed from the University of Brasilia, which I had to leave behind when I left Brasilia. But I still bought a Pentax at Fototica. But at the time, photojournalism actually used the Rolleiflex, the larger negative, thinking that this would give higher quality, right? And I insisted on using 35mm. I thought it was more practical, right? I remember very well at Manchete, when I worked there for just a few weeks, they forbade me from using the 35mm camera. I had to use a Rolleiflex, which they provided me.
Which was how many millimeters?
The Rolleiflex is 120mm, right? And it's roll film, so you only get 12 shots, right? And it doesn't make any sense, because then when you go to print back then,
You wouldn't enlarge it that much, right?
it won't make any difference, right? But I always preferred lighter equipment, something quicker to work with. The Rolleiflex is a bit slower. You have to look from above, right? But with the camera, you put it up to your eye and shoot, right? It's faster and less complicated.
For you, the most important thing wasn't the quality of the film or the image, it was the action you captured.
The issue of quality wasn't really it, right? Because there was no compromise for quality. That's it. Because the quality of a good 35mm camera is just as good as, if not better than, a Rolleiflex, right? So it wasn't a matter of quality, it was just that they thought a bigger camera like that was more professional than a 35mm camera. The 35mm was seen as something for amateurs, right? There was this prejudice.
But your concern was being able to capture something that the big camera might scare people away from.
Because I also don't like using big camera equipment. I never liked it from the beginning. If there's a smaller, lighter one, I always chose the smaller and lighter one.
If I offer you today an Alexa, which is one of the best cinema cameras, and a cell phone,
Oh, the cell phone, I have no doubt.
you're going to make your movie with the cell phone.
With the cell phone,
But then it lacks the quality you want.
it does. That's the thing. Of course it does. I challenge people. My latest films have scenes shot with so-called professional cameras and with a cell phone. Then, when we project it in a big theater like this, I doubt anyone can say, no, this is from a cell phone. This is shot with an Alexa.
Are you saying a cell phone could outperform a cinema camera?
I'm not saying it's better, but it's just as good. That's the thing. You have to know how to use depth. Of course, not just any phone. I'm saying this for making a documentary,
Aperture control.
a fiction film, right? Which is more complex. Obviously, a professional camera will give you more features, but for a news report, for a documentary film, for working out in the field, the cell phone is much more agile. The cell phone shoots in 4K. The newer cell phones shoot in 8K. But it's not about shooting in 4K or 8K. The lenses are very good.
And the phone's built-in lenses are...
Yes, very good. But you also need to know how to use them, right? Today, even with low light, the cell phone has an incredible amount, an incredible quality, you know? I wouldn't say it's a lower quality, not at all. It's just as good. Sometimes it's even better because it has something important. Also, it's easier to keep track of the focus with a cell phone because they have a very good autofocus system. So, whereas with cameras, you have to adjust the focus, right? So I like to work with long takes. I move the camera a lot. And then I wouldn't be able to do that with an Alexa, you know? I'd need to have an assistant running alongside to adjust the focus.
And that's what I wanted to ask as well. What is your working method? Do you approach people already recording? Do you have previous conversations? How do you manage to get the best you can for the documentary?
Also, it's case by case. It's not a formula, right? But let's say most of the time when I was still using 16mm cinema camera equipment, I used a very small, very light camera. I would already arrive with the camera on my shoulders so the person would see me like that, you know? It's talking, talking, and when I turned on the camera, it didn't create any awkwardness, you know? It felt like the conversation just continued, right? And the cell phone has a huge advantage in that sense, which is also an important aspect because I use a cell phone. Because when you go to film, for example, in a riverside, Quilombola, or indigenous community, when you show up with a camera, it's a very unequal relationship. You have powerful equipment there, filming the person, that's what it means. You're going to take my image, make money with it, keep doing it. I don't know what, I'll never see what you're doing again. Now, you have a cell phone, he also has a cell phone, so he's able to do the same thing you do. So he feels equal, he doesn't feel exploited.
You usually say that the camera is your memory, the camera is your notebook, and you've been saying that for a long time. But suddenly everyone started having a camera in their hand all the time. What's the difference between what you film as a documentary filmmaker and what anyone films and posts on the internet every day?
Because, first of all, it's not the camera that makes a film. It's not the fact that you have a camera in your pocket that the film will happen. The film is made in your mind. The camera translates what you want to say, and each person expresses what they feel like expressing. So people express themselves by showing selfies or making short videos. These are all valid forms of expression. But to make a film, to make a documentary, it's much more complicated. I'm not saying it's technologically complicated, but it's complicated to have the right conditions or to understand or to have control over what you want to tell. Because in reality, you're telling stories. We're all storytellers. Now, how do you tell that story?
You've been taking selfies for a while, right? There are already some selfies of you in Brasilia during the construction of Brasilia, yeah.
Yeah. I've always taken self-portraits of myself, right? Yeah, it's a habit, right? Always has been.
That was my question. What is the meaning of the self-portrait in your art, in your films?
No, I used to have fun with the camera. It was a way to use the camera, to enjoy the camera.
It wasn't to record your feelings at that moment.
No, absolutely. It has nothing to do with feelings.
Nor with vanity.
No, I didn't show them to anyone at that time. I didn't display the photos. It was funnier, but...
But video isn't just a photo either, right?
Yeah, there are videos of you. Of me, yes. I always took selfies with everyone.
How did you take selfies with the Super 8 in the mirror?
Right? No, so with your hand like this.
You already did it like this?
There's a sequence that's in the film Utopia and Dystopia, which I use in other films when I refer to my Super 8 work, where I'm in a Volkswagen with my hand out the window and I'm looking at the camera while the car is moving. It's a selfie, right? On video?
You're the inventor of the selfie.
No, the selfie was basically invented along with photography, right? No, but back then it wasn't called a selfie, right? It was a way to record. I liked to document what I was doing.
And how do you feel about this overcrowding of our minds with images that don't matter at all, like the influencer who's buying a new house and so on? And so on, the nonsense that pops up.
This will completely disappear in a few years.
Do you think it's going to end?
It will even become something rare. Someone who kept a video like that?
Ah, yes, these images will disappear completely. But what about this habit of exposing yourself and exposing yourself and exposing yourself?
It's human nature, human vanity, right?
But doesn't that take away the value of the image, which is made with some content, with some purpose?
I don't think so. The fact that thousands of people are taking pictures doesn't necessarily mean they're going to take a good photo. There are still photographers who stand out because of the quality of their work. It's the same thing as filmmakers who stand out and don't see TikTok as competition. They're two different things.
And are you a documentarian of content concerned with aesthetics?
No, I don't have a formula for myself. I'm concerned with portraying what I want to talk about. I don't have one. Even though I have an aesthetic background, I studied at a design school in Urma. I studied architecture at the University of Brasilia. But aesthetics don't interest me. What interests me is the person.
Form is not content.
For me, like I told you, I don't like to create. Ah, that's the way to film, right? Everyone has their own way, I have mine. And I don't want to say that this is the way to make documentaries or that making documentaries this way is better than another. It's better for me. It's the way I know and the way I like to do it.
Glauber was right. An idea in your head and a camera in your hand.
Totally, because there's no point in having the camera without an idea. And if I have an idea, back then, you could only make that idea happen with a camera. Today you can do it with your phone, which is also a camera.
Glauber had issues with you, correct?
No, it wasn't really trouble. Glauber just liked to stir up controversy with everyone, especially the Germans working there. That's how he was. Spy from the Goethe Institute.
Why? Didn't it make any sense? Not at all?
First of all, it had nothing to do with the Goethe Institute, right? And why would the Goethe Institute spy on Brazil, right?
At what time was that?
During the military dictatorship in the 1970s, right?
But was he doing that as an accusation or was it a bad joke? No.
It's not really a joke. He would say anything. I barely knew him, right? So there was no reason at all. I ran into him in a really funny way. Once I was on German television because I worked for German television correspondents and a producer from a German television show. He asked me if I knew Glauber. He said, I don't know him anymore. What do you want with Glauber? I said, I don't. We have here some footage that he shot in Italy, which was The Lion with Seven Heads, and it's very interesting material. We want to show this, but we wanted him to comment on it, to explain what it is to us. Can you do an interview with Glauber? I knew that Glauber was secretly in Paris. He was hiding there, right? And I said, well, I'll try. So Lais's mother, who was my wife at the time back in Bahia, went out and told me, oh, he's at Norma Bengel's house. So I went to Norma Bengel's place. Glauber was there. And I said, Glauber, this is the situation. You, the people from German television, are you up for doing an interview? He said, do they pay? I said, they do. And they paid well at the time because he was really broke. Glauber said yes, so he was eager to do it. Glauber, during the dictatorship in the 70s, so we went. It was actually funny because we went there under the Eiffel Tower to film, and I always shoot handheld. But I was using a German television crew that was in Paris. I was just there to do the interview. Then a police officer came over and said, you can only film with a tripod if you have authorization. And we didn't have authorization. We had to pay a fee, all that bureaucratic stuff. I said, no problem. I'll do it handheld. I asked the guard if handheld was okay, since they didn't consider it. It wasn't professional. So I filmed handheld. And the people from German television said, are you going to do it handheld? And I said, I'll do it handheld. Don't worry. And Glauber, in the interview, he only said crazy things. He started with that idea that he later developed further, that Golbery was the one who was going to save Brazil. Golbery is a general connected to the military, of course, and that Golbery is this, Golbery is that.
Save Brazil from whom?
From the military dictatorship, which had to be done through the military themselves. And when I go back to Germany and show them the material, they say, this material is no good. He's praising a general. We want to do something that criticizes the dictatorship, not something that, let's say, puts a general there, like he's a hero.
As a possible savior.
As a possible savior. They didn't do it, and I think he was probably a bit upset.
He recorded it and it was never used, was it?
Used you.
That Glauber recorded?
I recorded Glauber in France. Took it to Germany to show it there. I mean, I was in Germany, went to record Glauber, came back to Germany with the material. The idea was that the Germans would use this material of Glauber as a narrative for the images they had. Glauber made something in Italy, which reached them. They wanted to do something there, and Glauber aimed to profit. It was very tough, and neither thing happened because of Glauber, because they didn't want to know Glauber's ideas about the general. They wanted Glauber to explain. The images they had
that talked about the dictatorship,
that also weren't exactly directly about the dictatorship. But Glauber wanted to send Golbery's message, you know?
Glauber was in Paris and you were in Germany.
You were in Germany.
It was an exile, a self-exile.
I used to go a lot. I would return to Germany. First, I went there to study when the University of Brasilia was closed, and then I went back many times. because I worked for German television as a reporter, so I had to go there to finish the films. Then I met Wolf Gauer, who became my partner. We started a production company, Ibunik, and we filmed in Germany and here, so I was going back and forth a lot.
How is Germany connected to your film Irasima?
It has everything to do with it, because it was only made because I got funding from German television. It's a project that I took to German television. I had never directed a film until then. The story begins. Before that, I was working as a freelance photographer for Realidade magazine. And then they sent me and the reporter to Belém, Brasilia, which was still a dirt road at the time, still in the city of Paragominas. And there was a case, a report of counterfeit money being circulated. And the reporter, we went to Belém, and from Belém, we took a small plane and landed in Paragominas. In Paragominas, there was no airport. The plane landed right on the road itself, on the Belém-Brasilia highway. And the reporter went to investigate the story and left me waiting at a gas station on the Belém highway. I stayed there for about 2 days, watching what was happening and observing. I found all that activity interesting. During the day, it was a gas station, snack bar, and tire repair shop, and at night, the same people turned it into a big brothel. I said, if one day I tell the story of the highway, it will be through these two characters, the truck driver and the girl who prostitutes herself. I kept that idea in my mind. And then I had the chance to talk to the producer of a German television experimental program. It was a program with very low resources, but it was fiction. And he said, look, what you're telling me is very nice, the story is interesting, but show me something concrete so I can trust you. I hadn't done anything until then when I came back to Brazil. I met Orlando Senna through my wife, who was a theater journalist, and my partner, Wolf Gauer. We got out of my Beetle and went to the Trans-Amazonian Highway. I went with my Super 8. Orlando Senna went with his little notebook and Wolf went with the camera. Let's go, let's record what we're going to see. And I was filming and all, and I put this Super 8 together without editing, because I never edited Super 8, I just spliced it. Simply made a 25-minute little film. When I went back to Germany, I showed it. The Super 8 was silent at the time, there was no sound. I showed those 25 silent minutes.
It didn't even capture audio.
No, I didn't capture the audio. The Super 8 didn't capture audio.
There was no audio equipment.
No, I didn't even take it. There was no way. Well, I showed it to him. He was amazed by the images. He said, if you put these images in the film, I'll produce the film for you. I said, the images are on the roadside, and since the film takes place there, they'll appear in the film. That's how it all started.
But then you had to use a fictional device. Was it because of the dictatorship?
Yes, it was no, because the show was a fictional show. And to sell Irasima's story to this fictional show, I needed a script.
Irasima was a prostitute.
No. She didn't have any name. Does Irasima still understand? It was a project to make a portrait of a girl by the side of the road, and so we did this research trip, let's call it that. We went and came back in my little Beetle here, leaving Sao Paulo all the way to the Trans-Amazonian Highway. Imagine that at the beginning of the 70s at its peak, 1972.
And how much longer was the trip?
About 15 days or maybe a little more. And we entered the Trans-Amazon Highway through Marabá, but Marabá was exactly where the Marabá guerrilla was happening. We didn't know. We passed through Marabá. Totally, I knew there was a guerrilla, but I never imagined we were at the center of it.
I could have died.
Anything could have happened. Bearded guy, those characters driving around in that little Beetle. But then we needed a script. Orlando Senna wrote the script based on what he also saw by the side of the road, but his script was fiction. So we fulfilled the producer's wish, who was enchanted by the idea, and then we went back in the little Beetle. I went to film, but I wanted to film with my reporter's perspective, with my camera. And we really abandoned the script completely, but the film stayed close to the script. The script was the story.
He really signed it.
what Orlando signed, but also based on his observations from the reality of the road. But it wasn't a film made based on a script. The script was just a bureaucratic piece to satisfy German television.
Which was such a success?
This film has several things. First, because when we were filming Irasema, there were only 5 of us, and a German television crew passed by. I even met the producer of that crew, who was a reporter. They passed through Belém, and then they found out that a fiction film was being made for German television in Belém, and they wanted to know what kind of film it was. They looked for me, and they thought it was very strange how such a small crew could be making a fiction film for German television. They thought it must be a hoax. Something strange is going on there.
But what did he do with that? He published it.
He did a report making fun of you. No, absolutely not making fun of me, but more like trying to see what strange thing they were doing there. So what is this gonna be?
But do you remember what the title of that report was?
No, it's not a show segment. This report aired in December in Germany and caught attention. Everyone wondered what those guys were doing there, right?
Were you the only Brazilian in the story?
Weren't you?
Oh, Orlando wasn't either.
No, the whole team was Brazilian. The only German was Ulf, right? And one more, the sound guy who was also German, right?
So you made the film? How long did it take?
Filming Irasema. Hold on, you told it. So let's go step by step, and that report aired. It caught people's attention when the film aired. The film was made really fast. 15 days to shoot, a little over a month to edit. I filmed in October, edited in November and December, delivered it in January, and in February the film aired. And it was supposed to be like that, like Global Reporter, just air as a television program and end there, right? Because the television standard at the time was 16.
16 millimeters.
Right? It was made in 16, right? With direct sound within the German television standard. I did it exactly according to the 70 and 74 standards, 74.
The year I was born.
So you're 51 years old, right? Exactly. So the movie was on television, and it was, I remember it to this day, it was a Wednesday night. The show was on late, around 10:30 or 11 o'clock. For the Germans in the winter, it was very late, and there were only 2 state channels. At that time, there was no private television, and the competing channel was Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen.
You broadcasted on Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen?
On Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen, yes. And on the first channel, the most important channel, there was going to be a soccer match. I said, nobody's going to turn on the television to the second channel when there's a soccer match. But it was winter, February, and at the last minute there was a snowstorm and the match was cancelled. So whoever turned on the television saw Irasema.
And they liked it.
They liked it. A review came out, a small review, the following week in the Munich newspaper, and it caught the attention of one person and then another. I just know that it ended up in the hands of Jean Rouge. Jean Rouge found out about the existence of the film and asked to see it. Of course, he went to see it. I was already a fan of Jean Rouge, right? And I was really happy that Jean Rouge liked it. And everything else, because his filming style is very similar, right? And then Jean Rouge was the guy who promoted it, showed the film to French critics. It won a French Critics Award called Prix Sadoul.
In Cannes?
No, that was in Paris, before Cannes. And then, on the recommendation of Jean Rouge and those critics, it went to the Cannes Festival the following year.
And you were awarded there?
We won a camera prize. I don't know what, not a very important prize, because it wasn't shown in the main screening. It was shown in a parallel screening, which is very, very respected also, which is the Critics Week. Critics Week doesn't have a prize because Critics Week has, I think, 8 or 10 films. The prize is already being selected for Critics Week. That's already the award, because even today, Critics Week is like that. It's the film critics who nominate the films.
That get big applause at the end, right?
There was nothing like that. It was a small back alley theater, you know?
But it was an experience.
I used to put them up myself. We made photocopies, the movies flyers. We stuck them on lampposts. That's how it was. Cannes didn't have all that glamour. It was out front for the big theater, and there was this parallel life going on there.
But that's when your career started to get attention, right?
Yes, it started to get attention there, of course. The movie got a lot of attention, right? So there were a lot of reviews.
So much so that it was banned in Brazil?
It was banned in Brazil quite a while ago because right after it aired on German television, the military attaché from the German embassy sent a telegram to German television saying that the film wasn't Brazilian, that they couldn't present it as a Brazilian film because it wasn't. Because according to Brazilian law, for a film to be considered Brazilian, it has to have the invoice from a Brazilian laboratory. Even today, but nobody really cared either. Obviously, shot in Belém, spoken in Portuguese, Brazilian director, why wouldn't it be Brazilian, right? But the Itamaraty, every time the film was shown at a festival somewhere, there was a statement from the Itamaraty saying it couldn't be shown as a Brazilian film.
And in Brazil it was banned. Why?
In Brazil, it was banned for the same reason. Because they didn't allow me to submit the film for censorship without having the certificate of Brazilian product, which was issued, a document given by the laboratory. Because the film was developed in Germany, at the time you couldn't develop 16mm color film in Brazil. There was no way to develop the film in Brazil either. Since the film wasn't planned to be shown in Brazil, it was planned.
Were you very worried about that?
When I made the film, I wasn't worried. I sent it to Germany, had it developed. The issues came up later. But in the 70s and 80s, there was a very strong film club movement, very present throughout Brazil. And this movement managed to get around censorship. And the film was made in 16mm. I had 16mm copies of the film, which we brought to Brazil and distributed among film clubs, which were the grassroots ecclesial communities, the student unions, the labor unions, and the press unions. All of them had film clubs and used the film club as an activist tool to really provoke political discussion. And the film circulated a lot during those years, all within the film club movement. So it was widely seen, even though it wasn't shown in theaters, because censorship censored the 35 manual reels. What was shown in theaters, that was censored.
No one could see it.
They could, in a way, because since these were semi-clandestine or clandestine organizations, there was always the risk of the police catching them, as happened a few times. The copy was seized, then recovered. People knew how to deal with being underground, let's put it that way.
But do you identify any element that the military could have called subversive in your film? No.
I think everything, because here's the thing for the military. The Trans-Amazonian Highway. The project to build the Trans-Amazonian Highway was the great banner of developmentalist Brazil. For them to occupy an area they called unoccupied. Let's conquer Brazil, let's take possession of Brazil. So it was the apple of the military's eye. It was the Trans-Amazonian Highway project. So any view about this project that wasn't official, obviously they didn't like it.
And what did you see in the reality of Brazil? It was different from the official propaganda of the military government, which talked about a Brazil of great progress, of an economic miracle. You were seeing something different from that and showing it differently.
Totally, it had nothing to do with the reality of the place. First, they started from the assumption that there was no one in the forest, that it was empty, that there was too much land for too few people.
Nobody, a non-existent person.
So they didn't take into account that there were indigenous people, quilombolas and river dwellers living there. To this day, they are ignored. I mean, when people think about occupying the Amazon, deep down, the view that the military had about occupying the Amazon still remains today.
To this day, you mean in the ideology of the...
Ideology and in the method. Occupation, always one thing. From the outside in, never taking into account who lives there, and never a project on the contrary, from the inside out. Ask them what you want, what you need, let's build what you need, or we won't do anything because you don't want anything, you're not heard.
This is from that time.
No, that's later. That's already from the 90s. I kept working for German television. Here I'm filming an indigenous woman, Wayampi.
Why do Brazilians in general, or at least a part of Brazil, let's say, hate indigenous people?
It's not exactly hate, is it? It's something that's been around since the beginning. The Europeans considered themselves superior. They thought that indigenous culture had no value, that it was something primitive, and that indigenous people were occupying land they didn't need. They weren't considered people.
They were a nuisance.
Who were a nuisance. They just wanted trouble. That thing about saying they're lazy. But why? Because they didn't want to be enslaved. They didn't accept slavery. Or when they were forced to accept it, they also didn't do everything they were forced to do. They maintained their dignity or ran away. Here's what happens. There's a bit of everything. The story is tragic, not only in Brazil, but in South America as well. Everything the Spaniards did. There wasn't even a need for so much massacre because the diseases themselves were already decimating the indigenous people. Just simple contact here, and throughout Latin America.
Because Mexico had a terrible massacre.
There were always massacres everywhere, and there still are.
Massacres that you are witnessing today when we are not.
In Mato Grosso, there is an open conflict between the farmers and the indigenous communities. Right now, at this moment,
Nothing has changed.
yes, it did change. What I told you, it changed the organization of civil society. Today they shout, they protest, they're organized, they know what they want, but they're still not heard enough to influence politics in Brasilia.
We have a left-wing government in Brazil today. It's solving Brazil's problems, those that bother you so much.
It's so hard to say, because the government doesn't get involved in these areas. The government's presence is very precarious, so it doesn't really matter who the previous government was.
Bolsonaro's and Lula's governments for these areas didn't have.
No. Of course, there's a big difference, but it's not like Lula's government's willingness is enough to solve the problem. In Bolsonaro's government, things were more blatant. They took leaders, gold miners, and brought them to Brasilia, officially giving support, making it clear, we support you. You're free to do whatever you want. It's not like that today, but they still keep doing things the same way. On the contrary, today you have much larger and more destructive mining than you had 5 or 6 years ago. Not because of the government's fault, you see, but because the situation is not only in the government's hands. It's a much more complex issue. Because nowadays, if you look at the electoral map, who votes for the right, who votes against or in favor of deforestation, in favor of agribusiness, it's the north of Brazil. The biggest number of votes comes from the north, precisely in the areas that should be preserved.
But agribusiness wouldn't necessarily have to be an enemy of
The population,
indigenous people, nor of preservation.
nor of occupying larger areas, because the areas that have already been occupied and degraded can be restored.
Because I believe agribusiness is positive as long as it stays within its limits.
And within the law, Brazilian law is very good.
We're great at making laws, but terrible at enforcing them.
That's the thing.
What changed? Not in what you see, but in what you feel. In these last, how can I say, 50 years of my career as a filmmaker?
I still keep focusing on society's organization, and that hasn't changed.
No, I want to know what changed inside you.
Oh, inside me. I'm still optimistic, thinking that my role is important. I'm not just banging my head against a brick wall. I think that movies, the proof is that Hiroshima, 50 years later, is still here, being shown, being discussed, serving as a model. People say it's a film they'd like to make, so I think that's cool. I think I made films in a meaningful way.
Did you become more or less optimistic after 50 years?
Neither more nor less. I think the problems are still there in the same way. So, optimism comes from the movements that are more present and active today, and pessimism comes from the governments because governments come and go, but the vision doesn't change.
What would you like to leave as your legacy? What would you like your film to convey to future generations?
That's what it's doing. I think it sparks a discussion. It shows that there are people there, people who know what they want, who express themselves, and that films are used precisely as an activist tool.
So let's move on to the second act. Let's go. Jorge, now you're at home. This is our second act. Here's the idea. It's in the kitchen where we talk more freely. Vitor Nascimento says that if the conversation ends up in the kitchen, you're already part of the family. I wrote a book that's fiction, but there's one thing that's central to the story. A sculpture that's there in Ulm, at the Ulm Museum where you lived, which is the Lovenmensch figurine, the oldest figurine ever found, from 38,000 years ago. And in a way, it's interpreted as an element of shamanic rituals that connects us. That's why I was so interested. I have a very strong connection, I can't really explain why, with our ancestry. And then I wonder, in your research, in your immersion in the Amazon, you've been in the Amazon for 50 years, right? Do you feel connected to that, to our ancestors in some way, to what we were and what we stopped being?
It's hard to say that explicitly, no. But I made a film once, it was very interesting. It was a corporate film for a Swiss company called Pentafarm, which is one of the big pharmaceutical companies. And there was a Swiss-German researcher named Lelou. The wolf is, and we went with him to a farm he had in Minas Gerais where they raised a snake, a certain type of snake, I don't know which one it is now, from which they extracted a venom that was used to make a medicine against cancer, one of those extremely expensive medicines that cost millions, each pill, something like that. Pentafarm made this from that venom. So, his job was to create an environment where these snakes could reproduce. And the movie was about him, about his work. So we went there at night chatting, and the guy said the following: look, a reptile with a snake has a much better chance of surviving in the long run than we do, because if you draw a straight line, this is the Earth, even though the Earth moves a lot. You have the Earth here, you have the reptile, it hatches from the egg, it has no connection with its parents, it doesn't learn anything. It's going to be the same its whole life, but it also evolves, it also adapts, so the reptile's curve goes up a little. Now you have the mammal and the human being, extremely recent on Earth, who creates. All this confusion is up there. If you project it forward, that curve at the top is already gone, so in the reptile space, I'm still there, you know? So I think we're very transitory here.
Do you think we're on the path to disappearing?
We've been on the path to disappearing since we started. Our presence here is so short, and it will be short because I think we don't adapt. We're a bad example of adaptation on the planet.
A bad example for the planet since we destroy ourselves.
Because we self-destruct in every way.
What is the movie you haven't made yet but still want to make?
I'm making the movie I want to make. It's a new project and it's going in a completely different direction. Is it a spiritualist movie? Oh, yes.
You're a spiritualist, aren't you?
And why a spiritualist movie? Because it's a story that was told through a spirit. That's how it is. I can't say much right now. Actually, it's the search for the lost world. Because of this story about the lost world. The book called The Lost World, which is by an English writer, Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, and he is a spiritist. And some time ago, back in the 80s, his daughter, who was still alive at the time, communicated with her father. And she talked to a German journalist and said, look, my father gave me The coordinates of the Lost World, Biko, which is Spielberg's movie, the one with the dinosaurs and everything. And these coordinates lead to the plateau of Pico da Neblina. And then the journalist became very interested.
From when this statement?
In the 1980s.
This was recorded.
No, then this journalist looked for me. He wanted to go after this story, and someone said, go look for Jorge. Of course, he'll agree to anything in the Amazon. We went on an expedition that obviously led nowhere. We came back.
The expedition went nowhere. Why? What was the goal?
Since we couldn't reach Pico da Neblina's plateau.
It's possible to get there, but you didn't because you weren't prepared.
No, we weren't prepared for that, and at that time it was also very difficult. Very few people had been there. But it's a story, an adventure that didn't work out, that was forgotten. And when my material was recently digitized at the Amadera Salles Institute, all these files of mine started to show up, and I filmed with the camera. Video 8. The quality is relatively low, and in order to watch the material, I transferred it to Video Home System. That was lucky, because the Video 8 tapes deteriorated.
It's not Betamax, no.
No, much earlier than Betamax. So these images from that expedition remained. Suddenly this story came up again.
This story that you can't tell me.
Yeah. There. We'll pick this up from where I left off in 1984.
But just so we know the following, this is a story about worlds.
About lost worlds?
Other dimensions.
It's not other dimensions, it's earthly dimensions.
But more related to spirits.
And you.
Given your anarchist background, do you believe a spiritual world exists?
No?
And why make this movie?
I don't need to believe in it to do it. I do it because it's interesting and challenging. I think it's the
story you find interesting.
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter what the origin is, whether it's fantasy or reality, but every story has a power, right?
But has it ever happened to you that you started a movie without knowing how you were going to end it?
No, for me it's always the opposite. The movie happens based on what I want to say.
Let's move on to our third act. Let's go.
Let's go. This one.
We cut the head on this side here. Actually, we tried to show you. My father wasn't a journalist. My father was a newspaper vendor. He sold newspapers in the United States. And he won this camera as a prize in 1961. It still works today.
It's a Polaroid, right? Is there film for it?
There still was. Until recently, we even took some photos. They started making film again. They came back, right? In your adventures, did you end up spending a lot of time in the Amazon? Like all at once, yes.
I spent some longer periods there a few times at different moments, but mostly in the 70s and 80s. One of my first Amazonian adventures was a trip on the Rio Negro that lasted 15 days. It's a story that is still alive today, that has followed me my whole life. That's what it is. I made this trip with a German television reporter named Karl Brugger. I worked with him, I did the camera work, and he did the reporting. And it was in the 70s, and we traveled a lot through Latin America as well. He worked for a program on Bavarian television, which was a cultural program, but with a political angle, so it was always culture related to politics. And he happened to meet a guy who introduced himself as an indigenous person, but who was actually a German, and used the name Tatunka Nara. And this Tatunka convinced Brugger that there was a lost city. That he came from there, was born there, the son of a nun and a chief, but it was a lie. That's where the story is. He met this guy and said, look, I want to see the city where he was born. He said he's going to take me there. I thought the story was kind of absurd, but I really liked Brugger. We worked together. We went to Manaus, equipped a boat with Tatunka, and went up the Rio Negro, chasing this story of the lost civilization, a city called Atacor. And of course, we passed the city of Barcelos. Right after Barcelos, which was Tatunka's city, Catapuca lived in Barcelos. The boat got stuck. The river was going down in June and July. And I don't know, he probably got the boat stuck on purpose to keep us from continuing the trip. And he said, look, we can't go on. It's a big boat. But if you give me a small canoe, I'll go ahead and let the Akapo chiefs know about our arrival so they can welcome us without any problems. Then when we come back next time, you'll have an easier way in. I told Brugger this story is a total scam, and Brugger gave him a camera he had. The Nikon and the canoe, a canoe falling apart, and I was filming everything on Super 8. I have this image of Tatu carrying that piece of canoe, the camera hanging around his neck. I said, you'll never see it again, neither Tatu nor the camera, all right? We went back to Rio, some time passed. Then he lived on Senador Berguero, a busy street in Rio, an apartment building, a noisy mess. The caretaker comes up and says, look, there's a truck downstairs. The guy wants to talk to you. So we went down. Who was Tatunka? Then he says, see Tatunka? He came back, returned the camera. And I said, so? And the photos? Oh, well, the gamma rays and I don't know what from the chiefs, from the shamans there, burned the film. But your entry is guaranteed, it's open. There's just one thing. I'm here with a truck that I bought, and I want to take this truck to Manaus, and I don't have money for fuel. All that stuff, go ahead. Brugger again gives him money. How is he going to get to Manaus? In the 70s, there was no road to Manaus. Today, there isn't either, but we didn't have one back then, at that time. I said, this story doesn't add up. You won't sell the truck right there on the corner. But surprisingly, the guy took it all the way to Manaus and spent years hauling freight there. But he left you without a film. He left us without a film. And Brugger became obsessed with this story, completely obsessed. Obsessed with what? With the idea of finding the city of Yakakor. And that's the story that Tatum used to tell. For him, here's what happened. Brugger became so obsessed with the story of finding Kako that he quit his job as a television correspondent, which was a good job. And he gathered all the money he had. And he said, I'm going to be consistent now. I'm going all the way. There's no room for mistakes. I'm going to find Kako. If they found Machu Picchu, why can't they go find another city? There's more to the story. He wanted to make a great story, an anthropological discovery, and then he wrote a book about our trip, the first one we took. That book was an incredible success. He published The Search for Akakor. He fictionalized everything, invented real characters, but he fictionalized it, and it was a big success. And Deniken, who had written Chariots of the Gods at the time, read the book and was also fascinated by the story. There's a detail I didn't mention about the first trip when I was there. He had Deniken's book with him, and Tatunka started copying those hieroglyphs that Deniken had photographed of the astronauts, in short, of the alien cultures. And Tatunka was there practicing that writing, and then Brugger publishes a letter from Tatunka with that writing saying, look, this is the message from the people of Akako. But it was just a copy of Deniken. Deniken reads the book and believes his own lie. I thought he was going to accuse him of plagiarism. Then the following happens on the eve of him turning in the assignment. Foreign correspondents have a tradition when a new correspondent arrives to replace the one who's leaving. They throw a cocktail party, have a gathering, and invite friends to meet the correspondent. And I was sailing in Angra and came back because this reception for friends was going to be on a Sunday night. so I returned in time for the reception. When I bought the newspaper, at that time the first newsstand was only in Angra. The sailboat was further down. Then the headline was, German journalist murdered on Ipanema Beach. Who was the journalist? Brugger? He was murdered. He was murdered. So instead of going to the party, I went there. It was his funeral, damn right? So, it was immediately speculated that it was Tatunka who ordered the killing, because he wanted Yakako, and Yakako doesn't exist, right? Well, then 1,000 speculations. Journalists were interviewing me, trying to prove that Tatum was the one who did it. I said, Tatum is just a poor guy who has a sister of ours. How could he possibly arrange a murder in Rio de Janeiro? Would you say that? That's still my theory to this day, right? Even today, there are people who think Tatum was the one who did it. Oh, they didn't find the murderer? No, they didn't find him. They caught them, right? They were two underage boys. It was a robbery, and coincidentally, Brugger, as their correspondent said, went to get some fresh air by the beach and was coming back. Brugger lived in Ipanema. He had a penthouse there, and he had even told the German guy. And he said, look, if you get robbed, if there's a threat, and nobody knows who it is to this day. Now it's assumed that it was a minor. He fires the gun, a .22, and hits Brugger in the heart, who dies instantly. And to this day, it's not really known who killed him or not. The police arrested 1,000 people. Later, it was found out that it wasn't them, it wasn't them, it wasn't them. It was a worldwide scandal. The whole world was publishing this story in the 80s. He was a well-known reporter in Germany. In Germany, he's quite well known. But all the correspondents, of course, brought up this story. Well, that trip didn't happen, but his book became very well known. So many people come back to try to find Kako. Even today. 3 of those explorers, a young woman from Switzerland, another in Uruguay, all 3 went and disappeared. And they say it was Tatunka who killed those people. Tatunka has already become a spirit of the forest. Tatunka, the creature, is still there to this day. He's alive, he's alive. Selling the same story to anyone who'll pay, Akako? You never wanted to tell this story? I told it to a friend of mine, not in a documentary. No, not in a documentary, because the story brings bad luck. I don't want trouble. And Raphael, so you don't believe in spirits, but you believe in bad luck? Oh yes, I'm superstitious. That's it for now. And Raphael Eriksson, who also works with me, film director, writer, he, after hearing my stories, decided to write the story of Akapo, also somewhat fictionalized, but based on what I told him about Brugger, from what Gruber wrote. And this book was released now at the beginning of the year, a success. You're not going to tell me that Raphael is alive. Raphael is alive. But he didn't go to Capó. He wrote it here in São Paulo. What's the name of the book? Capó? You can buy it. Fantastic story. And then a German filmmaker decided as well. And the ultimate consequences, no matter how much he tried to find out who this Itatunco is, he researched in Germany and discovered that Itatunco is a guy who had killed someone in Germany. He's a convicted murderer in Germany. Itatunco is German. He's German, Itatunco, but he's not really indigenous. He sells the idea of being indigenous. But he's German. He has blue eyes. Yeah, he's German. No, he doesn't have blue eyes, but he looks like a German guy, you know? But the accent, actually, that he says is the Akakor accent. But in reality, the accent is German. So he's a fugitive from Germany. He's a fugitive. And here's the thing. There's speculation about why he was never arrested until today, despite so many suspicions and proven murders. My theory is this. Back during the dictatorship, he must have been an informant, and he's still protected to this day. His file is classified, the police won't open it, they don't want to show it, and he's protected by high-ranking army officials. He's got some serious protection, because it's incredible with everything that's said about him. He's still there, absolutely unpunished. Where he is, he's in Barcelos, which is Pará Barcelos, or on the Rio Negro, going up the Rio Negro for a few days. He's married to a Jewish woman and her parents went there. To Marcelo, also opening a boarding house, a small hotel that he manages today, and they live off Akako and live by selling the story of Akako. Anyone who wants to know more details has to pay him. If you pay, he sells it exclusively. There's that detail. And there have already been reports about Akako. Many from Fantastico books and more books. You go on the internet, look up Tatum Kanara, and you'll see what's there. Tatum Kanara is his name. You don't believe in Akako, but you believe that there is a civilization.
On the peak of Deblina formed by spirits?
Definitely not.
You don't believe it, but you're going to show it.
You know, there are remnants from the Mesozoic era, the dinosaur era. That's true. Ah, yeah, that's proven.
There are fossils up there.
No, there aren't fossils. You have bromeliads. You still have some elements from the Mesozoic era.
What are you hoping to show with your new film?
Something else? I can't talk about it now, but I don't need to prove that the lost world exists. Conan Doyle invented it, so it's in Conan Doyle's mind and underneath in spirit.
And who is really going to lead this story? But there has to be a real character, because it's a documentary, right? It's not fiction.
It's a documentary based on this story.
All of this is under state secrecy.
More or less.
So we can wrap up. Tell me a story you've never told anyone, or a secret from your movies that you've never told anyone.
I don't know, it's just that I'm a storyteller. Let me talk. I'll keep telling stories. Real and made up ones, and then I start imagining what it could be.
But you're a creator of fiction too, and you tell it as if it were true.
When I was a boy, here on Alameda Franca, together with my neighbor, whose name is Santorio Silvio De Ferro, my neighbor, we created a puppet theater, puppets, and we made puppets for the kids on the street and invented the stories that we presented in the little theater. This little theater became quite well known because the mothers would invite us to perform plays at children's parties and they would pay us. We found a way to make a little money.
You did all the voices and everything.
You made the puppets, did the voices, set up the theater, made the sets. It was a little team we put together, and we made really up-to-date stories. It was also during the time when the Soviet Union launched the first living being, a satellite, which was the dog, Laika.
I remember.
So Laika died, obviously. She got lost.
And this story was mentioned in that wonderful movie, My Life as a Dog.
I didn't see the movie, but I watched it.
Well.
And then one of the plays we did, which was very current at the time it was happening, that was the one where Laika goes up into space and all the animals there are trying to figure out how we're going to get Laika back. We had a satellite that went from one side to the other. On stage, a star like this with nylon threads that would go across, and the little puppets. Laika, and of course the giraffe with the long neck comes, manages to grab Laika and save her. I'm telling you this because I make up the stories, you know?
You made up the story of Tatanka?
Not the story of Tatanka. I didn't make that up. I made up the story of Tatanka. It's so fantastic that you don't need to make anything up. It's already an absurd invention. It was already born with that DNA. So when I tell stories about Tatanka, I don't need to make anything up because it's like it's already an invention.
If you mess with him, won't you make a documentary about him?
No, I met him a few times after that, but people are absolutely normal with Tatanka.
Lazaro, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It was a great conversation.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for everything you've done, for your work, for your contribution to Brazil. Thank you.